All right, with Hashem's help, we will learn today Yevamos Daf Lamed Dalid. We left off yesterday Daf Lamed Dalid on the top of the Amid, and let's make a quick review of what we learned. The Mishnah in Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis was speaking about two men that did Kedushin with two women, and by accident, when B'shas Knisasam L'chuppah, when they were getting married, they accidentally switched or exchanged each other's wives. And the Mishnah pointed out that there's a possibility for this to happen where there's going to be a total of 16 chatois, sin offerings, that will be brought. First of all, a man having a relation with a married woman, with an Ashes Ish, by accident, is a sin for which you bring a carbon chatos. Then there's a possibility that these two men were two brothers. So on top of the Isur of Ashes Ish, you have the prohibition of Ashes Ach, your brother's wife. There's a possibility that this can happen when the two wives were two sisters. So you have the additional lav of Achais Ishtoi. And then the fourth was that there's a possibility that both of them are in Nida, and therefore there were 4 violations committed by each party, by the man, by the woman, by the man, and by the woman. That's a total of 16 chatois. So now the Gemara opens up on Daf Lamed Dalid. Uman haytana the islay iser koilel the iser moisef the iser basachas. We just learned Daf Lamed Beis, Daf Lamed Gimel, the sugya of ein isur chal al isur. That normally, at least many Tanoim hold, that if something is already prohibited, if something is already usur, an additional prohibition doesn't go into effect on that person. In other words, why would each one have to bring 4 karbanos? Because they committed 4 sins. What were the 4 sins? A married woman, your brother's wife, your wife's sister, and a nida. If you were to hold ein isur chalal isur, so whichever one came first should be the only prohibition. Eloma, we also learned in the sugya on Daf Lamed Beis and Lamed Gimel, we learned that Rabbi Yosi, and according to others, even at Rab Shimon, that under certain circumstances, isur could be chalal isur. We learned about a concept called isur moisef. We learned about something called isur koilel, and we learned about something called isur basachas. In our Mishnah, the case that we just gave has in it a isur koilel and an isur moisef and an isur basachas. And the Tana, or the Tanoim that hold that when you have these exceptions, then a isur could be chal, will be chal al isur. This is how you're going to have 4 avedas, a total of 16 chatois. So first we have to explain why is it that the case that we just mentioned is a case that has in it an isur moisef, an isur koilel, and an isur basachas. So it's kedai to learn the top Rashi, Daf Lamed Dalid, Amud Aleph. Uman haytano the masdisen, says Rashi, the islay, that isur will be chal al isur, both through the rule of koilel, bein be isur moisef, bein al idei basachas, kigoin elo, which this will be the case of our Mishnah, shechayovin arba chatois, that there's going to be each person violating 4 chatois, says the Bach, dekeshekidish Reuven es Rachel. Let's begin with what happened. When Reuven gave Kedushin to his Kala, to Rachel, Nesra al Shimon, Rachel now was prohibited on Shimon because of what? 2 Isurim come at the same time. A Isur Bas Achas, which 2 Isurim came at the same time? Ashes Ach and Ashes Ish. The moment she became Mikodeshes, she's both, and as far as the halacha of her not being allowed to be with other men are concerned, she's a married woman, and she's Reuven's wife, she's Ashes Ach. Hainu Basachas, period. And that's why our Tana that holds that by Bas Achas Isur is Chalal Isur, you have 2. Now, Shimon v'Kiddush Leah, now that Shimon gives Kedushin, says Reuven's brother gives Kedushin to Rachel's sister Leah. So here we're going to say the following. As we explained yesterday, this is not Isur Maisav, this is Isur Koilel. Why is it Isur Koilel? Reuven, the Chaticha de Isura, is already prohibited on Shimon. when Shimon gave Kedushin to Leah, Rachel did not become more prohibited on anyone. However, before Shimon gave Kedushin to Leah, who was Shimon not allowed to be with? Only with Rachel. But if Rachel had a sister aside of Leah, let's call it Bilhah and Zilpah, Shimon can be with them. But now that Shimon gave Kedushin to Leah, that affected that now Shimon cannot marry any other of Leah's sisters because of the wife's sister, Achais Ishtoi. So we say Isur Koilo Migu, since the Isur Marchal and the other sisters of Leah, the Isur of Achais Ishtoi, it's also Chal and Rachel, a third Isur. Not only is she an Eishes Ach, and if she has Eishes Ish, she's also a Achais Isha. Let's read it inside. Migu the Asri Lehanach Kedushin, being that the Kedushin between Shimon and Leah had an effect that it prohibited Bikulu Shar Achvasa, all of Leah's sisters, Mishum Achais Isha, because of the erva of your wife's sisters, Asrinami Be'eshes Achiv. So this will also be Chalan Rachel, which is already your brother's wife, Mishum Achais Isha. Aflagav Dasura Aleha V'Kaima, even though she's anyways Asar Anim. And Vahainu. So now we have not only the Basachas, now we have the Isur Koilom. Now, however, how did we explain Isur Moisav? Isur Moisav means that if the Chaticha, the Isura itself, there was an area for whom she or it was permitted, and now there's something new that prohibits the Chaticha, the Isura itself. Upon whom is Rachel allowed to be with? Rachel is a married woman. There is one man with whom Rachel can be with, and that is with her husband, with Reuven. However, when Rachel becomes a Nidam, even with the only man who she could have been with, now she's also usher to be with. So there's an additional Isur on Rachel herself, Nida between her and her husband. Isur Maisav means that now that this Rachel herself becomes usher to her husband because of Nida, she becomes usher on other men because of Nida as well. Isur Maisav. Vadayin Rachel Zumateres L'Reuven. However, Baila, because Reuven is the husband. However, Pearson Ida. Now that when Rachel becomes an Ida, Migu the Itoisav Isur Allah Legaba Baila. Now that an Isur does go into effect on her Rachel to her husband because of Nida, Itoisav Nami. So this same Nida Isur also goes to Shimon. Harei Isur Moisav. Mamish, the way Rashi explained in Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis, what is Isur Koilo, what is Isur Moisav, and our Mishnah, if you hold of all three, then the Mishnah would work. The question is, who holds of all three? That's the question the Gemara asks. And anyone who learned the Daf yesterday and the day before that, Daf Lamed Beis and Lamed Gimel, were fresh. We just learned, especially according to the final explanation of the Machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. More than that, after Bar Kapara was Agish Lagin, now that we have Rab Chia's correct understanding, Rab Chia explained that Rabbi Yossi holds of Isur Koilo, of Isur Moisav, and of Basachas. Let's read inside the Tosfos Yeshanim. So the Tosfos Yeshanim is wondering, why is the Gemara asking, who is the Tan of the Mishnah? Hachi nami have matzi l'meimer Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara could have right away answered, it's Rabbi Yossi, the Islay Isur Koilo. And as he holds of Isur Koilo, like we learned yesterday, then for sure he holds of Isur Maisav, for sure, because we learned in Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis, Rabba Bohu and Rabbi Yechanan, but certainly Rabba Bohu held that Rabbi Yossi only holds of Isur Maisav and not of Isur Koilo. So according to Rab Chia, according to Rabbi Yossi, holding Isur Koilel, for sure he holds of Isur Maisav and Isur Basachas. So the Gemara Taka could have answered that who is the author of our Mishnah, the Tana, Rabbi Yossi. Elo, it says the Tosfos Yeshanim, that Nakat Rabbi Meir, the reason why the Gemara is going to give an answer, Rabbi Meir, it's not to exclude Rabbi Yossi. But the Islay Behedya Kol Hani Yachad, because there was a case that Rabbi Meir spoke about that only works based on Rav Meir's holding of Isur Koilel and Moisav and Basachas. Masha Enken Rabbi Yossi never explicitly gave a case that has to include all three. V'haraya, we were learning in Daf Lamed Beis that people began to interpret Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Shimon, that Rabbi Yossi holds of Isur Moisav. That would have been enough, perhaps, to explain Rabbi Yossi. Perhaps he would have to add on that Isur Koilel. you don't have to say Isur Basachas. In other words, there wasn't a case that demanded to explain Rabbi Yossi that he holds of all three Behedia. So Be'emes, the Tana could be Rabbi Yossi. But however, we're finding another Tana that clearly said all three. So back to the Gemara, Daf Lamadal, Damadal, the second line, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, our Mishnah will be Rabbi Meir, the Tanya. And we learned the following, or the Tanan, in Mesechtes Krisos. Okay, so as people were asking over the last few days, we find so many places throughout the Torah where one person does one sin and they're going to get penalized for many Avedas. Well, normally they will work because of Isur Koilel, Isur Maisav, Isur Basachas, and this will be a great example. There, the Mishnah in Krisos says the following, that Yesh Oichel Achila Achas, there is a possibility that a person should eat one thing, should eat a kazayas of food, all right? Tech Achilas Pras, and v'chayiv aleha arba chatois. And for that one achila, the person is going to have to bring 4 korban chatois and v'asham echad. So let's find a case where one act of eating will violate all those avedas. So if you have a person who is tamei, who is eating sacrificial meat that is chaylev, which already was noiser min hamukdashim, on Yom Kippur. So let's work it out. First of all, any tamei who eats hagdish is violating a sin for which b'mezid there is kares, and therefore b'shoigig korban chatas. Any person who eats even non-hegdish chaylev are certain fats, dafka from domesticated animals. There is no isur chaylev from a chaya, from a non-domesticated animal, but from the family of cattle, from sheep and from goats, their chaylev is asur bikaris, b'mezid, which means b'shoigig, if you eat chaylev, chayiv chatas. If a person eats noisar, which means every korban has an expiration date, and the meats that should have been eaten or burnt on the mizbeach until a certain time, if that time passes, then it has to be burnt not on the mizbeach. It has to be burnt. There were special fireplaces in the area of the Beis Hamikdash to burn it. And if a person were to eat that leftover noiser meat, chayiv kares b'mezid, therefore b'shoigig yechayiv achatos. And the fourth aveda is if a person eats on Yom Kippur. Eating on Yom Kippur is a violation which carries the penalty of kares. Therefore b'shoigig chayiv chatos. Now, on top of that, any person who does me'ilah, so if we're speaking about meat that should not have been eaten by the Kahanim, chaylev is meat that should only be burnt on the altar, that belongs to Hashem, there's an isur of me'ilah. That means if I disappropriate, if I misuse something that should have been used for the Mizbeach, and I use it for myself, I have hana'ah, then I'm chayiv me'ilah, and I have to bring a hasham me'ilois, aside of having to pay back the money plus a penalty. Okay, so these are all avedas. So you had a tamei who ate hegdish, one aveda. So a tamei that ate hegdish, the tamei ate chaylev that was hegdish, the tamei ate noisar, and on Yom Kippur, these are 4 chatois, plus the asham me'ilois. Now how do you have over here isur koilel, isur moisav, and isur basachas? So again, I think it's good to read the Rashi, who works it out. The Rashi, we'll start in the middle of the Rashi. I have a Vilna Shas, if you see on the side, the Maramakim of Trumais and Psachim, adjacent to that, on that line, in the middle of the Rashi, that the Hachim Efarish B'Krisos, this is the way we'll explain it, there Mesechtes Krisos, explaining the Mishnah, which will prove the Alma, Islay L'Rab Meir, Kulu. He holds, again, like we said, Isur Moisav, Isur Koilel, and Isur Bas Achas. The hachi over here, from when the animal was created by God, even before the animal was sanctified, given over to Hegdish, already nesra chelba ba'achila. Chelev is asur be'achila. However, chelev is muter ba'ano. So the first isur that was chal was chelev. However, when the owner was magdish the animal, hugdisha, how did we explain Isur Moisef? Isur Moisef means is if the Chaticha itself that was Asur, however there was some of it that was Mutter, and an additional isur was added to the chaticha itself. What happens when you were magdishit, hugdisha, migu di itoisav isur hana'a ala chelev. The chelev now not only is asur b'achila, but because it's hegdish, it's also asur b'hana'a. So the isur of hegdish is chal on it. If you hold of isur maisav, isur chal al isur. Just like the isur of chelev, of hegdish, of hana'a is chal. So now even if you ate it, there's also an isur of you eating hegdish. Mishum kachim itoisav beinami isur achila mishum zaris. So now the very fact that you're not supposed to eat hegdish, right? Or there's a tumah here. That was the case that we gave. That's an additional isur. Now va'afagav do asur v'koy b'achila, even though it was anyways asur. So now we have, because of isur maisav, you can have the fact chelev and hegdish, tami behegdish. Now comes the isur noisar. How does the isur noisar add anything against isur maisav until it became noisar, even though me or even a kohen, a commoner, was not allowed to eat it because it's chelev? But that was something that should have been mutar on the mizbeach. It was a mitzvah to put it on the mizbeach. But now that it became noisar, migu di itoisav isur la mizbeach mishum noisar. This chaticha itself has an additional isur. It cannot even go on the altar. So therefore isur noisar also goes on me, that I can't eat it also because of noisar. Itoisav namal koyin mishum noisar. So hani hanoch. That's moisav. We explained. Moisav is when the chaticha itself gets an additional isur added to it.
And kolel is about others.
Correct. Harei hanech trei mishum isur moisav. Now, what happens if nitma? Now, if on top of that it becomes tamei, which means that sha'ad achshav, the person who became tamei until now, before he became tamei, that person could have eaten the kohen other sacrificial meats. A kohen. That's called koilo, because the chatich itself doesn't have an additional isur, but the person was allowed to eat other pieces of hegdish. But now that the kohen became tamei, migu, that he cannot eat other pieces of hegdish, he also cannot eat this piece, which is already chelev and noiser. Sha'ad achshav haymuter b'chatichas basar kodesh, va'achshav neser bohen migu di mitaser b'shar chatichas mishum tuma. Therefore neser nami bezu mishum tuma, and that's the meaning of isur koilo. So far we had Maisav and Koilo. Now that it comes Yom Kippur, Vaiter, Migu, what does Yom Kippur do? Yom Kippur is another Isur Koilo. Why is Yom Kippur Isur Koilo? Because vis-a-vis this piece of meat, I already can't eat it. Nor can the Kohen, being Tommy, not eat any other Basar Hegdish. But before Yom Kippur, the Kohen was allowed to eat Basar Chulin. Any Achila Chulin, he was allowed to eat. But now that Yom Kippur comes, and now there's a new Isur on the Kohen, you can't eat Chulin. So Migu, that it's Chal on the Chulin, it's Chal on this piece also. Vaite the Isur Koilo. Migu de metaser b'chulin mishum Yom Kippurim, asenam b'kachim mishum Yom Kippurim. Hainu nami Isur Koilo. So far we have explaining the Tanakama that says that you're chayiv for chatois and the asham, that can only work if you hold that Isur Koilo, and by Isur Maisav, Isur is Chal al Isur. Now let's add. Came along Rabbi Meir back in the Gemara, and Rabbi Meir said, let me tell you, if you're looking for a Hechet Timsa where there can be one Achila that carries it for Chatois and one Asham, I can find you a Hechet Timsa, I can find you a case where there's additional Isurim. Now for these additional Isurim, we're going to have to also hold of Basachas. What did Rabbi Meir add? He says that Im Hoysa Shabbos, that if this also happened on Shabbos, and v'hoitziu b'fiv, and the way Taisus will explain, there is a isur of hoitzah on Shabbos, and Taisus right away asks, there's an isur of hoitzah Yom Kippur, and Taisus quotes the Sugya in Krisus that at least in the beginning of the Sugya, we held that Rav Meir held that on Yom Kippur there's no isur of eruv and hoitzah. That was a havamina, even though it's not the maskana. We'll figure that out in a moment. But the reason, at least Taisus proposes, we speak about Shabbos, was because on Yom Kippur there was no isur of carrying. Taisus then says, but the end of the sugya will say that even Rav Meir holds that on Yom Kippur there is an isur of hoitzah. Adarabah, so Taisus is going to make the Isur Basachas work dafka because of it. But let me first explain what's the Hoitzah. Hoitzah means you have to pick it up in one domain, and you have to do a Hanacha, you have to put it down in another domain. What is the Hanacha when you eat? when a person swallows food, the same moment where the din of eating goes into effect, which is called the hana'as garainoi, which is when the food goes down one's throat, that is also called the hanacha. So what were to happen, that when the person is walking out of the private domain, they're walking out, and while they're walking to the public domain, they swallow it. So the isur of achila and the isur of hoitzah happened at the same time. So you have an additional isur of hoitzah. Now, the challenge we have with that pshat, which is how Rashi explains it, is that here we're speaking about two complete different avedas. Even people who hold that ein isur halal isur, period, everyone will agree that if I am writing and making a fire at the same time, I'm chayiv two isurim. Because it's not isur halal isur, it's two different isurim. So why, according to Rashi, is this considered an additional isur when we're speaking about a separate isur? This is called hoitzah, and this is called achila, even though they happen at the same time. Which is why Tosfos explains the Gemara like this. Rav Meir mentioned Shabbos because Rav Meir holds, like the Gemara says in the Maskana, that you cannot carry on Yom Kippur either. So here, when the person carried, how many violations did you violate?
5.
Before, aside of the Tanakama, that's the way Tosfos learns, you violated 2 isurim of carrying. What 2 isurim of carrying? You carried on Shabbos, and you carried on Yom Kippur. That's the same isur of hoitzah. Ein isur halal isur. So to explain this, you have to say that there's bas achas. In other words, I'm allowed to carry during a weekday. I'm allowed to carry on a non-Yom Kippur day. Shabbos and Yom Kippur were the same day. So at the moment that the isur of hoitzah came because of Shabbos, at that same moment, the isur of carrying came because of Yom Kippur. Being that Rav Meir counts as an additional violation, that means he holds isur basachas. Now, according to Rashi, Rashi holds that since the swallowing, the act of achila was the hanacha, here we're finding a case where eating and carrying are done through the same act. Cooking, like I said, and writing are 2 different ma'asim. Here it's one ma'aseh, it's considered one isur. But here also it goes because of the isur of bas achas, that when Yom Kippur comes, Yom Kippur doesn't allow you to eat, Shabbos doesn't allow you to carry, they both come together, weiter bas achas. So here you see that according to Rav Meir, which only adds to the Tanakama, Rabbi Meir clearly is giving you a case where a person does one act of achila, which is also hoitzah, and is going to be chayiv, according to Rashi, for carrying on Shabbos, according to Tosfos, for carrying on Shabbos and Yom Kippur, because he holds Meisif, Koil, and Basachas. That will be the Tan of our Mishnah. Just finishing the Mishnah there in Krisus, Amrullah, the Chachamim tells Rav Meir, Einoi min Hashem, that we did not count the carrying, again, because carrying hoitzah is not achila. So why are you mentioning another type of aveda? No, you're right. We didn't count it because we're speaking about someone who ate, and the act of achila brings upon it 4 chatois and 1 osh. Okay, so that's the end of that. So again, the way we learned in the Tosfos Yishanim, we're not saying that our Mishnah is only Rabbi Meir. The Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. The Mishnah is also Rabbi Yossi. And other Tanaim who hold of Isur Koilel and Isur Maisav and Isur Basachas. Now the Gemara opens up another famous sugya called Ta'a B'Dvar Mitzvah. We learned this together in Masechta Shabbos. A great case. A person had 2 children. And they were twins, let's say. One of them was born at the end of Shabbos, and the other one was born Sunday. In other words, the 8th day of one child is on Shabbos. And because of the Bayoim Hashmini repeated 3 times, Bayoim Hashmini even on Shabbos, but the other one was born on Sunday, can't do a bris milah on Shabbos. First of all, you're violating Shabbos. And furthermore, you're not doing a bris milah. There's no mitzvah there. So, but there's a whole sugya regarding if a person thought he or she were doing a mitzvah, but ta'a b'dvar mitzvah, they made a mistake. And v'lo yasa mitzvah. Their mistake, the reality was they did not do a mitzvah. Are they going to be chayiv a chatos or no? It's the Artanoim that held that when do you have to bring a chatos for a shoygig? When you made an accident, but you didn't think you're doing a mitzvah. But when a person thought they're doing a mitzvah, that's why they made a shoygig, maybe they should be exempt. So the case there was, the 2 babies got switched. The baby that needed the bris on Sunday was accidentally gemalt on Shabbos, which means ta'a b'dvar mitzvah v'loi asa mitzvah. So there we learn in Rabbi Eliezer de Mila that Rabbi Yeshua says he's exempt from a chatas. And Rabbi Eliezer holds he's a chayiv chatas. Now let's go to our Mishnah. So now that we said that it's Rabbi Meir and there's all these Averos Achal, 2 men got engaged to 2 women, 2 brothers to 2 sisters, and by accident, each one slept with the other one's wife. So there's an Isur Eishes Ish, there's a Eishes Ach, there is Achais Ishtoi, and Nida. 1 second. This person was getting married. Getting married, the Be'ilas mitzvah of the night of the marriage is a mitzvah. Elamah, he was a Tabed Dvar mitzvah. He thought he's marrying his wife. He ended up having an act of intimacy with someone else's wife, God forbid. L'cha'era, according to Rabbi Yeshua, he should not have to bring any chatas. He's Tabed Dvar mitzvah, v'lo yasa mitzvah. Nevertheless, he should be pater. Now that we said that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir was the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the Talmud both of Rabbi Yeshua and of Rabbi Eliezer. So it would be better that our Mishnah, which is Rabbi Meir, which goes according to Rabbi Akiva, should be able to go according to all of the teachers of Rabbi Akiva. So says the Gemara, Ali b'daman. Now that you said it's Rabbi Meir, which means Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua, if that would have been Rabbi Akiva according to his teacher Rabbi Yeshua, ha'amur, ta'a b'dvar mitzvah, v'lo yasa mitzvah, we're adding the words by heart, pater, here also he should be pater. But the Mishnah says he's chayiv nach 4 chatois. Ela liba de Rabbi Eliezer. So l'chayder has to be according to Rabbi Eliezer. So first of all, that's not the end of the world. And Iba Yisema, the Gemara always tries to make our Mishnah be reconciled with as many Tanoim as possible. La'olam aliba de Rabbi Yeshua. Ki ka'amar Rabbi Yeshua ta'a b'dvar mitzvah pater. When do we have the idea of a person who wanted to do a mitzvah and accidentally didn't, will be exempt from a chatos? Ha neimili. This is only for the case that we said by heart, but in the Perek of Rabbi Eliezer de Mila gabi tinoikos, by the changing of babies, this manoi bahul, the person was rushed. Rushed, you need to do the bris on the 8th day bismanai. So because of the time pressure, that's another justification. The person thought they needed to do it today. They made a mistake. But you can't be mechayiv the person achatos. The person was under pressure, so to say. But when it comes to marriage, don't tell this to the single people. Even the Ein Zman Bowl, it's taka mitzvah to get married. But you have to go to the chuppah tonight? If you go tomorrow night, it's echt good. So there's less pressure, so there's less justification. How did you make such a mistake? That God forbid you exchanged your wife, you switched the wife for someone else's wife. So maybe a lie. Good. So now the Gemara says it's not true. How can you say that even Rabbi Yeshua will be maida, that when there is einoi zmanoi bohul, even Rabbi Yeshua's maida, that you are chayiv achatos v'harei truma. We're going to learn a case of truma, which is a case l'cha'ira. The ein zmanoi bohul, where there's no pressure and there's no rushing of time. And Rabbi Yeshua will still hold that the person who was ta'ah b'dvar mitzvah v'lo yasa mitzvah will be pater. What did we learn by truma? The Tran, hoya oichel b'truma. A kohen who always thought he's a kohen is in the middle of eating truma. And in the middle of the meal, he becomes aware v'noida that he's either a ben gerusha, which pasels him, which makes him into a chalal mida eiraisa. In other words, he's a child from a union that his father, a kohen, married his mother who was already divorced, or he found out during eating truma that his mother underwent the chalitza ceremony. And midrabanan, a kohen is not allowed to marry a chalutza, and midrabanan, the child is a chalal which cannot eat truma. Now, eating truma is a mitzvah. He's a tabed dvar mitzvah. He thought he was a kohen. And there was no mitzvah to eat the truma this second. You can eat it now, you can eat it tomorrow. And there we learned Rabbi Yeshua Machayev, Rabbi Eliezer Machayev Keren v'chaimish. Like any non-kohen who eats truma, right, aside of, the penalty there is, I took away his money. And therefore I have to pay him back with a penalty. I'm penalized, I'm punished. And Rabbi Yeshua takes away the penalty. Because Rabbi Yeshua l'shitasei holds that hatoya b'dvar mitzvah v'lo yatsa mitzvah is pater. So l'chayda, there we see even by Eino Zman Bol, Rabbi Yeshua holds Pater. Says the Gemara, no. Ha'itman Allah, we already learned regarding that Mishnah, Mesachtas Pesachim, that Amar Rav Bibi Bar Abaya, that Mishnah is speaking about Truma be'erev Pesach Haskinon, Dizman Bohul. It says in the Torah, Va'ani, Hinini Esati L'cha Es Mishmeres Trumoisoi, that Kahanim have to make sure that Truma never gets burnt. What happens if you have Chametz Dika Truma and you are on the 14th day of Pesach? There's a mitzvah for the Kahanim to eat it before the Zman Isser, which as we learned in Mesechtas Pesachim, Midrabanan, from the 4th hour there's a Isur Achila, from the 5th hour you already have to burn it. So he has to eat it beforehand. Exactly, that was the whole the challenging sugya there. Correct? Oh, so therefore, there Rabbi Yeshua says Pater because he was bold. And Enachanami during the year, if a kohen finds out in the middle of a meal that he's not a kohen, he's a cholol, then he will be chayiv to pay back the keren v'choimish. And that's why even Rabbi Yeshua will hold that he's chayiv chatas. V'iba yisema. Or, now we're going back to the beginning. What was the question? The question was, who was the author of our Mishnah? And again, as we learned yesterday, Rab Chia, Rab Bar Kapara was agishlagin. So, it means he was refuted. The end of the sugya was that Bar Kapara's understanding of Rebbe was refuted. And what was the end explanation? That Rab Chia is right in saying that even Rabbi Shimon holds that when it's bebas achas, it's chal. And we can make our Mishnah speaking about a case where all the four Isurim, Eishes Ish, Eishes Ach, Achais Isha, and Nida, all came at the same time. So it doesn't only have to be according to the Tanoim that hold that it is Moisev and Kailul. And this really answers the other point as well. Because the whole reason why we are challenged that our Mishnah doesn't go according to Rabbi Yeshua is like we explained. Is because if our Mishnah is only Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir is according to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva had two Rebbes, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Eliezer, so we would like it to go according to Rabbi Yeshua. If it's Rabbi Shimon, so it's not the end of the world if it's not Rabbi Yeshua. Zol Zayin Rabbi Eliezer. It doesn't go through Rabbi Akiva. Oh, that Be'isur Basachas, that our whole Mishnah can come out in the case of Basachas, Valiba the Rabbi Shimon. So now we have to work out our Mishnah. So as we learned the Rashi in the beginning of today's shir, the Ishsur, the first marriage, Reuven engaged, gave Kedushin to Rachel. So the Isur of Eishes Ish and the Isur of Eishes Ach are always Chalva Basachas. How can it be that the other two are Chalva Basachas? So before we get to Nida, it can only be that the Isur of Achais Ishtoi is Chal at the same time if everyone gave Kedushin at the same time. And we already spoke about it a few days ago, that if both brothers gave a shliach, each one gave him a pruta or more, and they told him, Reuven told the shliach, I want to be Mekadosh Rachel, and Shimon told the shliach, I want to be Mekadosh Leah. Happened to be that both sisters, who also wanted to get engaged to those same men, they both told one shliach, be Makabel Kedushin for both of us. So one shliach, L'hailacha, met one shliach like Kabbalah, and he gave one act of giving both prutas, and he said that one coin of Reuven is for Rachel, and the other one is from Shimon to Leah. And that one Maisa was Mekadosh both of them at the same time. So the Kedushin was Chalba Basacha, so here we have three Lavim, that even according to Rab Shimon, if they, God forbid, exchanged wives, they'll be violating B'shoigeg, three Avedas. Isur, Chalal Isur, B'basachas. The only question is Nida. Let's read it inside. It says, Bishlem Kulhu, Mishkachas Lahu. The first three work out, the Shavinu Shliach, that Shavinu Shliach, they, the men, send the Shliach. And Vishavu Inu Shliach, and the women, the sisters, they appoint a Shliach like Kabbalah. Upaga Shliach B'Shliach. So at the same moment, we know for sure, both of them got engaged. Eishes Ish, Eishes Ach, and Nachais Ishtoi. Elonida Seichem Mishkachas Lahu. So I'll tell you how it happened. That b'shayfas mitoich yud gimel la'achar shleisha asar la'achar yuvi inu and mitoich shnei masar la'achar shnei masar lechivu inhi. That we're speaking about a case that both the brothers and the sisters were born on the same day. The sisters were born a full year after the brothers, but they were all born on the same day. It means on the same day that the brothers will turn bar mitzvah, on that same day the girls will turn bas mitzvah. And now that we speak about the way we'll explain the Shitas Rashi, now you can take the Shliach out of the scenario. Because the Tosfos' comment on Rashi is, how can Ketanim send a Shliach? There was no Shluchim now. While they were still minors, both brothers, walked over to the two girls while they were still minors, and they gave them the Kedushin. But they told them that this Kedushin should only be Chal when both of us have the din of Gedolim, which will be on the same moment. Such an act is valid. Even though they gave it while they were minors, since they said, we want this to go into effect, let's say they were born on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Everyone was born on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. And the girls were born a year later. So everyone becomes an adult on the same Rosh Chodesh Kislev.
Yeah, but then we hold that even though they're Teomim, right, there's no precedence between them. They were born at the same moment.
Doesn't have to be the same moment. When it comes to the days of the Bar Mitzvah, it goes by the day, according to the way we paskin. Even though we have Yom Echad, but we don't hold that's Me'es La'es. No, that's why we don't have to know what time we were born. The point is that they're all turning Gedolim at the same moment when that Rosh Chodesh Kislev goes in. And the act of Kedushin was given before, but it's only going to be Chal altogether. And if their period they began to flow with blood right before their birthday, and it went into the birthday, so at the moment that the Kedushin was Chal, and when the Din in Nida went into effect for them, because even if she became a technical Nida before she became an adult, but there's no Chiyuv mitzvahs. So when they became adults, which is when the Kedushin was Chal, which is when they became a Nida, all happened b'bas achas. Anyways, Tosfos understood that Rashi understood that his final answer is also working through a Shliach, and Tosfos asks on Rashi that how can a katan or ketanois be mamana shluchim? It's not valid. So Tosfos has another whole way of learning the Gemara, but we explained the Gemara properly that Rashi takes out the Shliach at the end of the sugya. I'm sorry? So we're speaking, it works out that if an act was given when people are still minors, but they said that this should go into effect when we become adults, it works. They can accept it, and it only goes into effect. So they got married on their birthdays. And while they got married, they were all needers. So they don't reject it later. Okay, so now we finish that. Now the Gemara asks another question. 2 dots that we learned in the Mishnah, that mafrishin oison, that if they were adults, even though that if their husbands are Yisraelim, being that they had a relation with their husband's brother by accident, they will not become asurim l'baylehem. Nevertheless, we learned the din of hafchana, of hafrasha for hafchana. And just to clarify, I didn't say it yesterday, that if, God forbid, they got pregnant, it's not just a yichus problem here, it's a mamzerus problem. Because an engaged woman is considered married, a halachically engaged woman. And if she had a relation with another man, her husband's brother, or any other man, that child is a mamzer. So the reason why she cannot go back to her husband right away is because if she'll go back to her husband and people will see that she got pregnant, you won't know is she pregnant from the Be'ila Asura and the kid is a mamzer, God forbid, or is she pregnant from her correct husband and the kid is kosher. And you can't say, let's see how many months she was pregnant, because there's a possibility that a woman will give birth after 7 months. And even though you think that it's only 7 months from her second husband, it's 9 months from that mistaken Asr Dika Be'ila. So you have the idea of Hafrasha 3 months, to have a Hafchana, to know who the father is. Is the child a mamzer or not a mamzer? Says the Gemara, this is a very famous Gemara now. Now we're getting a little bit off Yevamos, but it's interesting. It's more Chumash Rashi on the Parsha. But there's a rule that a woman who was never with another man, a psula, will not become pregnant by the first relation she has with her husband. What was the case of our Mishnah? That they got, unfortunately, they exchanged wives by accident. Each one took the other one to the chuppah. So they had one be'ilah. Why do we have to have the 3 month separation? Because if she'll be pregnant, to make sure the child is not a mamzer, or at least to know that the child is a mamzer, as the Gemara, we have a rule that a woman does not become pregnant if she was a psula, right? A woman who was a virgin will not become pregnant through the first act of intimacy. So to this, the Gemara answers, okay, when they exchanged wives by accident, each one thinking that that woman is his wife, he didn't have one act of intimacy, he had two be'ilas. Shebalu v'shanu. To which the Gemara jumps back 1 second. You learned the Tanei Rab Chia that this is a case where there's going to be a total of 16 chatois, because there were 4 avedas. As we just explained, Rab Shimon, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, it's a case where all the Yisurim are here. So if everyone violated B'shogig 4 Yisurim, 4 is 16. But if it's Balu Vishanu, if they had 2 relations, so it's not a case where you have 16 chatois, you have 32. Frag die Gemara, Elo hadu tani Rab Chia hari kante zayin chatois, tulasin v'tarten havien, to which the Gemara right away counters, 1 second. This is important to review. We learned this a few times together. And this source is a Masechtas Krisis. When it comes to people doing something by accident, what happens if in their state of Helen, remember we learned these words in Masechtas Shabbos, in their state of not knowing, they repeated the same thing again and again and again. So there's a big machlekes tanoim. So you have the opinion of the Chachamim. The Chachamim hold the words is yediyos mechalkos. That if you did not become aware that what you did was a sin, if there's no awareness in the one time of helim, of not knowing, no matter how many times you did the maisa of the sin, you only chayv 1 chatas. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that holds biyos mischalkos. Every time you did an act, you have to bring another carbon chatas. So right away, if you challenge that it should be 32, obviously you hold that I was behelam echad, you must be speaking according to Rabbi Eliezer. That's why you asked the question. According to Rabbi Eliezer, why 32? According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's not the idea that makes the sin, but it's every act of sin. B'shoigig demands another chatos. Every relation itself, it's called in the Balashon Nikia, every time there's a kayach, there should be another sin. Every kayach, there's another hana. For every hana, there's another chatos. Ulatamech, you're asking 32, obviously because you not because you forgot, because you're not accepting the shitas chachamim, because there was helam echad. But you're basing your question on Rabbi Eliezer, the mechayiv al kol kayach v'kayach, tuven havia, according to Rabbi Eliezer, one act of be'ilah. Every time there's a new kayach, there should be a new chatos. Eloma, you're going to say, no, that even though Rabbi Eliezer holds biyos, mechalkois, but still, the first koyach is the one that counts. Well, if that's the case, then even if balu v'shanu, the first koyach is that which counts. Elo the b'koyach rishon kochashiv, hachinami the b'irishon kochashiv. Okay. Now that we mentioned the rule that ein isha, well, the best answer would be that our mission is the chachamim, or Rabbi Chia went according to the chachamim. And Rabbi Chacham holds us behelam echad. That will be a better answer. He just told him, I know you ask according to Rabbi Eliezer, ask on yourself. Amalei Rav Nachman turning the page. How can you have this rule that ein isha misaberes would be a rishayna? Tamar. We're going to learn now in the Gemara, for those of us who have the schus to learn chitas, and for everyone else who learns Chumash Rashi, the way Rashi in Chumash explains the story of Eir and Einan is going to be different than the way the Gemara explains it here. Once Eir and Einan died, let's go back to the story. Yehuda left his brothers because of Mechiras Yosef, and he married a woman, and he fathered 3 children, Eir and Einan and Shelah. These were the 3 sons. Then it says that Yehuda found a wife for Eir, his Bechar, her name was Tamar. And Eir married Tamar, and Eir died. And Einan did Yibum with her, and Einan died. And the Torah speaks about them behaving sinfully, which is why he was bad in the eyes of Hashem, and they died. And then subsequently, she wanted to do Yibum with Shelah. Yehuda did not tell her Katlanis, we spoke about this. He didn't tell her it's not happening. He told her he's too young. And al Pipshuta Shal Mikra, he wasn't lying to her. She's too young. And eventually, she had a relation with Yehuda. And from that relation, she got pregnant. And according to the Pshuta Shal Mikra, it says, V'lo Yosef oid ladata. He had one relation with her. Now, the way Rashi and Chumash learned... Correct? That's right, Mashiach comes from that. So, according to Chumash Rashi, the way Rashi explains, Eir and Einan had relations with her, but it's called, they were Zereya Bifnim, they were Dashmi Bifnim V'Zerei Bachutz, which means that they were Moitzi Zera Levatala, which means that they had a normal relation with them, but when it came to time for the man to be Moitzi Zera, he left her body. That's Zera Levatala, and that's why it's called Einanism till today. And that was their sin. According to that, when Yehuda had a relation with her, she was a woman that was a bula. She had a relation with Eid and with Einan. Our Gemara is of the tradition that Eid and Einan never had a normal relation with her. They had what's called B'Lashon HaGemara, they had a Bia Shaloi Kedarka. For the same reason. They didn't want her to get pregnant. But how did they not get her pregnant? By having a Bia Shaloi Kedarka means that the man doesn't go into the normal marking by the woman. Which means that she was still a psula. No. She's married and she's Yevamos, but she's still a psula. So now the Gemara, Tamar did get pregnant the first time she had a natural relation with Yehuda. Amar Lei responds Rav Nachman, Tamar. No, be'etzba mi'acha. That Tamar, before she had a relation with Yehuda, she knew that she's destined to have with him Peretz and Zerach, the grandparents of Mashiach, David HaMelech. So she, with her finger, she broke her psulim. Because she knew that Ein Isha Misaberes B'Biyah Rishayna. And now I'll prove it to you. Damar Rabbi Yitzchak, Kol May Achoy Shel Beis Rebbe, Tamar Shaman. The house of Rebbe, the great Rebbe, had many daughters that were great women, that were Nashim Tzidkaniyos. And what they did was that right after they got married, right after the husbands lived with them the night of the wedding, they encouraged their husbands to go learn. In those days, the places of learning used to be far away from where you lived. So they supported their husbands traveling to learn Torah. But on the other hand, they wanted to have children. So they wanted to make sure that the night of the wedding would allow them at least the possibility to become pregnant. And they knew the rule that Ein Isha Misaberes B'Biyah Rishayna. So many of these women were Ma'acha Be'etzba. They used to break their psulim with their own fingers for them to get pregnant the first night. Not at all. He knew that she's a Nashim Tzidkaniyos. She knew that Be'etzba Ma'acham. And they called her Tamar. And why did they call her Tamar? Al Shem Tamar. They were called Tamar because that's what really the original Tamar did. Shema Acha Be'etzba. Okay. So now the Gemara challenges back. 1 second. Why are you telling me that Tamar was Ma'acha Be'etzba? They were married. She was married to Eid Einan. Havi Erva Einan. Answers the Gemara here. Erva Einan Shimshu Shaloi Kedarkan. Not like Rashi in Chumash. And the Maharsha says that there must have been a proof that we lost. Why the Gemara said that? When you read the Pshuta Shal Mikra, why would you say that Eid Einan did it Shaloi Kedarka? They did it Kedarka. Elamai, why did they die? So Rashi says because they were Moitzi Zera Levatala. Both of them. That's the Gemara here. I may ask the Gemara. We learned Kol Esrim Ba'arba Chodesh. That when a person, this is one opinion, we don't pass in this way, but the Shitas Rabbi Eliezer, we had a sugya similar to this in Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. When a woman is nursing, in those days, if she were to lose her milk, her child would die. There wasn't formula. Practically, if a woman didn't have how to give food from herself to the child would die. If a woman who's nursing would get pregnant, the possibility of her milk drying up goes way up. So therefore, a nursing woman, in those days, woman nursed for 24 months, she should not get pregnant. So Rabbi Eliezer holds, if you remember in Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, the suggestion there was to use a birth control called a moich. Very good. Shamesh is b'moich. Here we are learning that for the first 24 months, dash mi b'fnim v'zoyre mi b'chutz. Different Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds that a kosher birth control would be for the man to have a normal relation with his wife, but before the zera leaves, he should leave her. It's shocking that Rabbi Eliezer, we'll learn this later, from all of the opinions regarding the sin of spilling your seed in vain, Rabbi Eliezer is the most chamer. And ironically, the Tana who's the most chamer holds that in this scenario, this is what one can do. Well, like I said, Rav Moshe Feinstein explained this Gemara based on Pikuach Nefesh, because if he'll have a relation normal with her and she'll get pregnant, which doesn't happen today, but then the baby might die, which also doesn't happen today. Problem is that why is it Pikuach Nefesh? Who asked you to don't have a relation? Pikuach Nefesh, don't have a relation with your wife. Madach, when there was we learned in Parshas Noach, right, when the whole world is suffering, a man cannot be mishamish with his wife. Okay. Pikuach nefesh, what to do something and then at the end to be zoyre mi b'chutz. But that's Rabbi Eliezer. Amar lei, so the Chachamim tell Rabbi Eliezer, halalu, having a relation and being dash mi b'pnim v'zoyre mi b'chutz, That is Elaka Maisa Erev Einon. So what do we see from that? And therefore the Chachamim say, we had this in Daf Yud Beis, Shomer Psoim Hashem, that a man has a mitzvah to be with his wife, be with your wife. And have a normal relation, and don't, God forbid, be Motzei Zera Levatolo. Are you worried she might rely on God? Shomer Psoim Hashem. Hashem watches over the fools. So we're fools, we don't know what we're doing. We don't have the knowledge that this might cause that, which might cause the other. Don't be such a chacham. Do what you need to do. Do mitzvahs, and God will protect you. Bottom line is, you see from that exchange that Erev Einon had a bia kedarka. What was their sin? That they were motzei zera levatala. Before the zera came out of their bodies, they left their wives. Not like we're suggesting here that it was a bia shaloi kedarka. Answers the Gemara that's not really what the Chachamim meant. That kamaisa erva einan, kamaisa erva einan, v'loy kamaisa erva einan, kamaisa erva einan. No, it's the general sin of being motzei zera levatala is called maisa erva einan. What was their way of being motzei zera levatala? Bia shaloi kedarka. They were having a relation with a woman in a way that she cannot get pregnant from it. That whenever he had a relation, this is einan, with his brother's Eir's wife Tamar, v'shiches arza. Shiches arza doesn't mean mamish that the zera went on the ground. According to us again, shiches arza means that it was a bia shaloi kedarka. So the zera went in a place where it cannot be moiled. But it wasn't exactly like the story of Er and Einan, because the ilu hasam shaloi kedarka. Again, we're insisting on that. But v'hachi over here, the Rabbi Eliezer, what he's telling you to do is kedarka, elama, kedarka, but dash mi bapnim, and at the end v'zayim mi bachutz. Now the Gemara asks, Bishlam Er Einan, the reason why Einan was sinful, there was some type of zera levatalas in there, as it says in the Chumash, that v'shiches arza. Ela Er minolan. How do you know that Er sinned? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, because it says Yevamos gam oisai, that Einan also died, implying that Einan died for the same reason Er died. In other words, af hu ba'oisa misa meis. Now the question is, why did they do that sin? Bishlam Einan. Why did he sin? It says in the Chumash, Mishum loy yeh hazara. Because since he knew that when you do an act of yibum, the child goes al shem achiv. So for whatever reason, Einan did not want for his child to be al shem achiv. However, ela er, my tama avidachi. Why didn't Er have a normal relation? According to us, why did he have bia shaloi kedarka? So the Gemara answers that he did it kedei shaloi tisabir. He did not want his wife to get pregnant. V'yakchis shiafya. He felt that her getting pregnant will take away her beauty. Ironically, just to remind ourselves that Tamar, according to some opinions, was the daughter of Shem, which means that Tamar was 600 years old, 700 years old. Can you imagine? How old was Er and Einan? Do you remember? I think 7. 6 or 7. Nevertheless, they didn't want her beauty to go away. Gavaldik. So
Rashi says the same about Lamech and his 2 wives.
That's right. But there, no, it's the fact that men did not want the wives to get pregnant by Lamech and his 2 wives, Ad and Sila. It doesn't say that one wife was 600 years older. Today, imagine. Anyways, right. Now like this. It says in Parshas Mitzayra that when a man has a relation with a woman, just like when Zera leaves a man, the man becomes tummy. It's a tumah for which the man has to go to the mikveh and wait until the evening. You have also, the woman also becomes tummy. Now there are 2 things that are metame the woman. The first thing is the bia itself. A relation with the woman becomes tummy. And the second thing is that if the zera leaves the woman's body, the zera touches her, she becomes tummy. So for us married men, the reason why now, before a woman can even start counting the 7 clean days, it began with 3 days, then it became 4 days. We wait 5 days. That's because if the zera of the man leaves her body, that zera is going to knock off one of the 7 clean days, even though she won't have to start counting all the way from the beginning. But that day is not called one of the Shivas Nakim. So you have to wait for the time that the zera would die, and that time is midai raisas 72 hours, 3 days. That we know because before Matan Torah, Hashem gave the din of Perisha, and Perisha was for 72 hours. And the 3 days became 4 days. And at least for the Ashkenazim, for us it's 5 days. For Sephardim, it's 4 days. By Psulim, it's 4 days. But that's where it comes from. But we're not talking here about the Zera leaving her body, making her tummy. Here we're going to learn about the act of the Bia makes the woman tummy. Just like the man, for which mikvah and head of Shemesh is enough for them to become tired again. So let's read this inside. So Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a Braisa, it says, like, let me read the Psukim. In the first pasuk it says, V'ish ki seitze mimenu shichva zera. Every time a man has an emission, a seminal emission, v'rachatz b'mayim is kol psara, he has to go to the mikvah, and even after he goes to the mikvah, v'tamei, he's tamei ad ha'arif, until the night. That's pasuk tezayin, right, in Parshas Matzorah. Then we're going to skip pasuk Yud Zayin. We're going to go to pasuk Yud Ches, and it says Ve'isha asher yishkav ish oisa shichva zara, and a woman with whom a man lived with her, the oisa is extra, a shichva zara. So it says V'rachatzu b'mayim v'tomo ad ha'arev. So they are both tamei. A bia is metame the woman. The question is, why did the Torah have to say the word oisa? It could have said Ve'isha asher yishkav ish shichva zera. So says the Braisa, the word oisa is prat lekala. Prat lekala teaching you what we're learning until now, that when a woman has a relation for the first time, what were we saying until now? That ein isha metama, ein isha misaberes, b'biyah rishayna, what's Lashon Chazal? That ein isha misaberes b'biyah rishayna, since a kala cannot become misaberes b'biyah rishayna, so the tumas biyah doesn't go on a kala. She's not tummy. Now, she's not tummy with this tumah. That's not relevant today to the halachas. All the Rishonim asked, so what? If she's not tummy because of the bia, everyone will agree that when the zera will leave her body, the zera will make her tummy and a chanami. But then we're not talking about that. Or as I think the Tosfos points out, that if after the bia the woman will put a moich after the bia, something that will not allow the zera to leave her body, so taka shall be tar. Or the word oisa is an exclusionary word. If a man has a relation, she becomes tamei and not someone else. Who does not become tamei? A kala. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Chachamim, no. Oisa is not to exclude a kala, even though ein isha misaberes b'biyah rishayna. But if you have a biyah kedarka, and it's in a makim or a woman could become pregnant, the biyah is matameh her. What does Oisa exclude? Shaloi kedarka. That if there's a biyah shaloi kedarka, the act of biyah does not make her tummy. Omar lei hoin. Rav Nachman, hoin.
Make her tummy, but makes her marriage le'ibul.
That's something else. Yeah, okay, we're talking about now just Tumah. Hoin, the name, Shem Chacham. He's the name of the son of Rav Nachman. Tells Rav Nachman, Lema, Kosava, Rabbi Yehuda, HaTorah, Chasa, Al Tachshite Kala. Why would the Torah give an exception for a Kala not becoming tummy? I'll tell you maybe why. Because a Kala invested money to put on eye makeup and to put on blush, to put up a lot of makeup on herself to make herself look beautiful to her husband. Right? That we learned this together in Masechtas Yuma, that for the first 30 days a Kala should look beautiful for her husband. After 30 days, she will always look beautiful for her husband. So that's what it says over there. But here it's the first 30 days. If she'll become tummy, she'll have to go to the mikveh. If she goes to the mikveh, the waters will wash away her makeup. Maybe the reason why the Torah gave an exception to Akala, they wanted her to stay with her makeup on. Marley, so responded that Rav Nachman Tusan, that's not the reason. Or maybe that's not the primary reason. Or let's word it even better, that after a man is married to his wife, she's beautiful without makeup. Why did the Torah exclude her? Now, why did the Chachamim disagree with that? It was, why did the Chachamim hold that Oisa goes on Bia Shaloi Kedarka, but Michael Mifligi? So says the Gemara, Rabbanan Savri Shichva Zera, that the word Shichva Zera in Pasuk Yud Ches, it says V'isha she'yishkav ish oisa Shichva Zera comes to exclude Ha'ra'ah. Ha'ra'ah means the beginning of a relation. There's a machlekes if Ha'ra'ah means only Neshika So'ever, that the private parts touch, or the beginning of the penetration. But in any event, Ha'ara is speaking about the beginning of a relation where there is no seminal emission. So Shichva Zera comes to exclude that if there's no seminal emission, then she's not tummy. Oisa on top of that comes to tell you that even if there is a seminal emission, but if it's in a place where a woman cannot get pregnant, she's also not tummy. That is the Chachamim. However, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, that Shaloi Kedarka, both Shaloi Kedarka and Ha'ara'a, Mishichva Zera Nafka. It's when Hashem already tells you that what bia makes a woman tummy, a bia where there was a seminal emission, we're speaking about a Hoitzah Zera that is in a place where a woman can get pregnant. So that already excluded Shaloi Kedarka. So the extra Oisa has to be used to be Prat, Kala, based on the logic that Ein Isha Misaberes Ve'bia Rishayna. Let's hop another few lines. Kiyotze Ravin Amar Rabbi Yechanan, a very interesting rule. This is a fantastic ending. Kol Sheshoasa Achar Baila Eser Shanim. If a woman is either divorced or widowed, and for the next 10 years, she decided never to get married again. So 10 years went by, and her mind was not even thinking about the act of intimacy. So the din will be that even if she gets married after 10 years, Shuv, Eino Yer Ledesh, she will no longer be able to have children. Now listen to this, it gets exciting. So Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman, when do we say that if 10 years went by and the woman didn't get married, she will no longer get pregnant? That's only if during those 10 years, she'ein datali nasi. That during those 10 years, she took her mind off this whole subject. But if she was thinking about getting married, she just didn't find the right guy. Then even if it took 10 years or more, when she gets married, then she could become pregnant. And Amalei Rava, so Rava told his wife, who did Rava marry? The daughter of Rab Chizda. We learned this together already. Rab Chizda had a daughter. First she married Rami. Remember that? Rami Bar Chama. And Rami Bar Chama passed away. And more than 10 years went by. And then she married Rava, and she had children. So Rava told his wife, she tells the daughter of Rab Chizda, the very fact that you were widowed for 10 years, and now that we got married, you have children, what does that prove? That's what people were saying on her, that she had a relation with another man in between. Because if she wouldn't have had her mind on this whole subject, then how are you pregnant? So God forbid he wasn't accusing her, but he told her that people are saying this about you. That that the rabbis are murmuring about you, that hey, we have kids. You must have done something not kosher. So she tells her husband, Rava, I was thinking about you. And we were going to learn this from Masechtas Baba Basra, that when Rab Chizda had his daughter on his lap when she was very young, Rab Chizda had two students in front of him, Rami Bar Chama and Rava. And he asked his daughter, who are you going to marry? Which one? So she said both. And she knew that she said that Beruach HaKodesh. So when Rami passed away, at that time I think Rava was married. And even though that this is before Cheno the Rabbeinu Gershon, but we spoke about this a few times, it was very rare, Bizman HaMishnah, Bizman HaGemara, for a man to have more than one wife, even though it was permitted. So since Rava was married, she knew that she said she's marrying him, Beruach HaKodesh. So she needed to wait for Rava's wife to pass away. And more than 10 years passed, but she was thinking about him. And I'm sorry, it's like the Asi Lakami Rabbi Yosef. There was a woman that came in front of Rabbi Yosef. Amalei Rebbe, I want you to know something. You rabbis say that if 10 years passes and we're not married, we don't have kids. I'm going to prove your rabbis are wrong. That Anishu Isi Achar Baili Yasser Shanim, I waited more than 10 years after I became a widow, and then I got remarried, and I gave birth. Which means that this statement is wrong. You know what Rabbi Yosef tells her? That's because you were not faithful. You'd sinned. Admit it. The rabbis are never wrong. Amar Allah biti al titziu laz al divrei chachamim. Don't negate the words of our sages. Tell me what really happened. And she owned up. Amar Allah, she told me, I had a relation with a guy. It doesn't matter. No, it means that she was thinking about the relations. And therefore, she was able to get pregnant. We'll stop here. And God willing, we will continue tomorrow.